Can you share with our audience a little bit about your day-to-day job? What do you do? And why are you doing what you're doing?
I work on a few different community and content initiatives which really help to promote Australian technology and innovation to the world, and then also help to connect, Australian companies with other companies. Well, it's early days, but yeah, it's going pretty well so far.
So you mean that the economics right now is starting to become a bit warmer?
Yeah, 100%, right? So I think like the main thing for me being in Vietnam in this period of time is to make Australians not just think about banh mi or pho when they think of Vietnam.
Right.
They also think about the amazing things that are happening in tech and innovation.
Fan to follow your blog and to read more about what do you think and what in your perspective about Vietnam.
It's this concept around in Australian culture when someone starts to do really well, people sort of start to cut them down.
We do that can instantly piss off an Australian.
Maybe just don't, make a joke around like kangaroos or all the kind of really Aussie stereotypes. Like maybe come with like a hat with like straw corks on it or all those kind of things, because that's really cliche.
Hello and welcome to NFQ Podcast, APAC Market Expansion. So in the show today, we'll have Dickie Currer. We will gain more insights from Dickie's experience and expertise in market expansion. And I'm Jessie from NFQ Vietnam.
I'm Dickie, I'm the hype man of Australian tech and innovation.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we start, can you share with our audience a little bit about your day-to-day job? What do you do? And why are you doing what you're doing?
It's a great question, Jessie. So for a bit more context, I work on a few different community and content initiatives which really help to promote Australian technology and innovation to the world, and then also help to connect, Australian companies with other companies around the world in different ecosystems. And then I also create a lot of content which is around about global innovation trends, right? So understanding what's happening in different countries. I'm curious. I've always been really curious. I sort of stumbled into the innovation space sort of 2 or 3 years ago, working for a startup community, and I started to realize that the entrepreneurial industry was something that I really enjoyed. It's always changing, it's current trends, there's so many things you can do in the industry. And to be honest, I've always been a secret traveler. I've traveled the world, been to 65 countries, lived in a few different countries, and I always had the ambition to be a journalist and a travel writer. And so just recently launched my business startup Vagabond, which is about sharing stories about global innovation because of that. So I guess a little bit of it has been planned, a little bit of it has just been serendipitous.
So this is what you wanted to do ever since you were very young?
Yeah, I got bought an atlas when I was 4 years old by my godmother. And I could tell you every capital city, every flag within the age of 6 years old. And so I was so obsessed with this atlas. And I always wanted to be a journalist, an actor, or a travel writer. And in the last couple of years during my job, I've started to write a lot of stories and realized I'm becoming a journalist. I do a lot of things like this, where I talk and jump on stage and talk about Australian technology and innovation. And I'm sort of realizing I became an actor. And then now the ambition is to talk and write stories about countries like Vietnam, so I can actually become a travel writer as well. That's the dream.
Wow. So okay, basically the dream come true. So you are living in your dream right now.
Well, it's early days, but yeah, it's going pretty well so far.
Okay, so I have a question about this. What are the differences and the similarities of your childhood pictures compared to the current picture of Australia?
Well, I'm going to let you all a secret. I was born in England originally, so I moved to Australia 10 years ago. I am now an Australian citizen, and I feel like I've got a passport, and the fact that I go around the world talking about Australia means I might be allowed to say I'm Australian. But when I grew up in England, we didn't have a technology ecosystem. We didn't, innovation was something that just happened, and that probably just happened in corporations, right? Whereas now I feel like working in this space, I'm seeing it's something that's so current and something that's unnecessary and something that happens everywhere. So for me, that's been a huge change from my childhood. I'm still the same person. I've still got the same curiosity, and still that same kind of ambition and desire to see the world. I guess now the difference for me, at least personally, is that I've seen some of the world now and I actually have the access. I think one of the amazing things about where we are currently in the world is we're so connected, right? Whereas I think I grew up in a small village in the north of England, and I felt like that my whole world was in that village. Whereas now, how easy it would be for me and you to have a conversation if I was in Melbourne and you were, in Hanoi, say, we could have a conversation instantly.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
how different the world's changed. So I think for me, still same curiosity, but a different world in terms of connection.
Right. So, at the hive man of the Australian startup ecosystem, could you share your insights on the current state of the startup ecosystem in Australia? And what are some fact and figure interesting things that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this startup ecosystem in Australia is in a really strong space. We're starting to notice. The ecosystem generally is a bit like Vietnam in terms of there's two major hubs. We're sat in Da Nang right now, so not discounting Da Nang, which is the third biggest hub. But in Australia we have Sydney and Melbourne, which are kind of the centre of the innovation ecosystems, with Sydney being the largest of the two. What I'm finding really exciting at the moment is we're actually starting to see a lot more of what we call the local or regional ecosystems, a bit like Da Nang, starting to come up now and have a lot of exciting things happening. A lot more startups being born there, a lot more infrastructure's been there, a lot more investments coming from the local governments. So cities like Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, which we define as more regional cities, and now great places to start a business. Before, maybe if you were a founder of a business there, you'd have to move to one of the major cities. Now you can stay in your city. Da Nang, where we are now, it feels very much like the Gold Coast in Australia. And the Gold Coast is a place now where entrepreneurs are realising there's an awesome lifestyle to be had, and they can still start a business. Probably the hardest part, probably similar to most of the world right now in Australia, the hardest part is getting funding for your business. Recently, so the first quarter of this year was the worst the funding has been since 2022. So really down in terms of funding going into the ecosystem. We obviously had that kind of 2020, 2021 bubble where startups and tech was exciting and everyone's putting money in post-COVID. We've seen a bit of a drop now, but the last quarter just gone. The funding was the highest it's been for about 2 years. So we're now starting to see a bit more funding go into the ecosystem again, and the venture capital funds actually starting to take more risk, which is really great as well.
Right. So you mean that the economics right now is starting to become a bit warmer?
Yeah, a little bit warmer.
Lately.
This last quarter was a little bit false in terms of the data because there was quite a few big funding rounds. So a lot of companies made $100 million Series A, Series B rounds, which meant it was a little bit, the numbers were slightly inflated overall. It's still really hard for the very early stage companies, but we're seeing things getting a little bit better. And I still think there are, in terms of like desire and appetite to become an entrepreneur, it's still very huge in the UK.
Right. So you're also traveling a lot across like APAC area, or I mean Asia in particular.
Yeah.
So what do you see is the connection between Australia economics and Asia economic, and especially in startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think thus far it's been a bit of a missed opportunity. Australians generally think of the US first, then they think of the UK or Europe, before they really think of engaging with Southeast Asia. A lot of that's culture, language, I think that's one of the biggest reasons. I think it's a huge missed opportunity because it's a local market, right? APAC is the market. We are right here, and there's way more to Southeast Asia, especially, than just Singapore. So I think we're seeing an appetite shift now to actually work in countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, which is really exciting. And we're seeing that as well from the Australian government, right? They have just opened up a landing pad in Ho Chi Minh City, one in Jakarta as well. And that's part of the reason why I'm here, to actually, I guess, make those ecosystem connections in real life. And I'm on a bit of a mission in the next couple of weeks here to really shine a light on why Vietnam and why now. Mostly for myself, but also just for Australians, so they can actually understand the amazing things that are happening here. And I think culturally, Vietnam's quite a similar culture to Australia. Like there's definitely differences and nuances, but
Yes.
I think we understand it quite well. Like I live in Melbourne, right? And we've got a street which is literally like Little Vietnam. It's called Victoria Street. Every restaurant's Vietnamese. Every shop was, and everyone I've met here, everyone I've met in Vietnam has been saying to me, "Oh, my uncle lives in Sydney," or "I went to university in Adelaide." So I think there's a lot of like cross-cultural similarities,
Right.
and we understand the Vietnamese culture really well.
And food as well, food bringing people together. And when you talk about, okay, I know that street, I know a lot of like, when you mention about Vietnamese culture, you definitely mention about food.
Yeah, 100%, right? So I think like the main thing for me being in Vietnam in this period of time is to make Australians not just think about banh mi or pho when they think of Vietnam.
Right.
They also think about the amazing things that are happening in tech and innovation.
Okay, that's what I'm very, very curious how Australian portray Vietnam in particular, Vietnam as a nation,
Yeah,
and Vietnamese people.
yeah. I think they're hardworking. I think they they can see potential opportunity in Vietnam. I think maybe, and this is speaking just kind of colloquially, it's really hard to speak for an entire nation of people and not offend people, but I think maybe they don't quite distinguish the difference between the whole of Southeast Asia. I hear people say sometimes, "Oh, we should do more work scaling into Asia," which is like me saying, like, let's go scale into Europe, right? There's 54 countries, I think, in Asia across how many languages, hundreds of languages, and different, cultural ways of doing business and opportunities. So I think maybe that's one thing that could be improved on, is actually understanding each of the micro cultures and climates and countries,
Right.
and understanding what they're exactly known for.
Yeah.
Which again is kind of the reason why I'm here.
Right. So does that mean that Vietnamese people need to stand out, need to bring up more, distinctiveness in the culture to differentiate, or might not be differentiate, but like stand out or make it like, okay, when you talk about Asian, but which country in particular we are mentioning about?
I don't think it has to be. I don't think it's that Vietnam's responsibility. I think it's more about like my newsletter that I've just started, my content business started, Vagabond. That is literally the passion and the mission behind that is to actually educate people about different parts of the world. So for me, it's like, I think Vietnam's got a very distinct culture. So I don't think you need to do anything. Look, there's definitely a piece of work to be done in terms of innovation to actually, for the Vietnamese, almost like to export Vietnam, right? Like, how do we actually make sure that you're in the right places, people are turning attention to Vietnam? I think that's something that definitely can be done more, but in terms of the culture, no. I think it's more on the Australian side to actually learn a bit more and try to understand a bit more and actually come here. Like, I want people to come here and see what I've seen this week. It's really blown my mind.
So I'm also one of your fans to follow your blog and to read more about what do you think and what in your perspective about Vietnam. But how about Australian? Like, what is the core essence of Australian society? Giving it more context, let's say we talk about the US, we talk about hero, I want to save the world. You see a lot in movies, comics, and all. When we talk about Israel, it's a startup nation. It's about innovation.
Yeah.
And about Vietnam, of course, you've shared just now. So how about Australia?
Australia is definitely a lifestyle country, which has its positives and negatives, right? So it's amazing to live. Like, coming from the UK is more of a hustle, kind of like, I was working class growing up, so I had to like fight to the top, sort of feeling. Whereas I think Australia's got a bit of an easier start, a bit more middle class. And because of it, it's a lifestyle culture, right? So it's very much, get off work at 4 p.m. and go for a surf, which is incredible. A bit like Da Nang, actually. Da Nang feels a bit like that. But its downside maybe is when you think about its economy. It's a little bit harder sometimes, to maybe get the extra push to go further and to grow more or take bigger risks because, you want to have a good life at the same time.
Right.
I think it's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. It's definitely a balance to find. There's also a little bit of a thing called the tall poppy syndrome. Have you heard of this? It's this concept around in Australian culture when someone starts to do really well, people sort of start to cut them down like a tall poppy. So it's almost like people are a little bit like humble and don't want to brag too much or don't want to like be too confident about their abilities, because which is hard in the tech world, right? Because you want people to kind of, especially in the US, if we hear Australian companies that have gone to the US, quite often they'll be told like you need to be bolder, brasher, louder, more confident, and Australians are like, we can't do that. It's hard, isn't it? It's against our nature to do that, So I think that's a little bit of the culture as well, which is like quite unique to Australia.
Right, that's interesting. And given the business context, is there anything else? Like what we talk about just now is more like people in general.
Yeah.
But in business in particular.
I think we're quite, Australians are quite relationship driven in terms of the culture. Like the business culture is quite casual. As you can see from my attire right today, like it's very shorts and t-shirt sort of casuality, casual way of speaking. Often when we're doing business, it's a conversation first. It's either a coffee or a beer. There's not really much formalities. I always say to people when I first moved to Australia, my meetings were 20 minutes of like talking about, football or the weather or kind of how your day's been, and then 10 minutes of business at the end.
Right.
Which can be very different when you go to and Singapore, it's completely opposite. I feel like when I go there, it's just business from the first second when I sit in a meeting. I think Vietnam's kind of the same. There's a bit of chit chat. So I think that's something that can be quite different. In terms of quite uniquely Australian in terms of the business culture.
This is interesting. Yeah, of course, when we compare about within Asian, but compare about Vietnam and Singapore, we see the totally different in the picture, in the way people approach any business meeting, So
Definitely.
It's much more formal as compared to Vietnam, where it's more casual and where you feel like it's easier to get into the conversation.
I feel like being in Vietnam and in my current experience and having meetings here has been very similar. Like I've generally speaking, I had one or two where I had a translator and it was a bit different dynamic, but generally it's lunch, it's coffee, it's a beer, it's just having a conversation, getting to know someone. I think the other thing to note about Australia is it's quite brand driven. So I think people are quite there's a stickiness to what brands people use, right? So it's quite consumerism in that respect. So it's something really interesting to learn. Like I think Australians are more likely to choose a brand they know and can relate to over something that might be cheaper or easier or better. There's definitely like a brand affiliation culture.
So is that related to the part where you said about lifestyle?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah. And I think you got to remember, we are an island on the edge of the world, right? So and it was when I first moved from England to Australia, the hardest thing that I noticed was this culture around Australia first. So I remember going to the supermarket and someone saying to me, where's that? I picked up an apple and they're like, where's that from? Is it Australian? And I was like, I don't care, it's just an apple. In England, we just get fruit from anywhere. I'm like, I'll eat it, and I was like, oh, we should buy an Australian apple to support Australian culture. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But I'd never thought about that in England before, It's because the island's self-sustainable and it's so far away, so I think that means that people want to support Australian brands. I think that can be hard for companies looking to come into Australia. So I think if you're a Vietnamese company trying to scale into Australia, it's really important to build good relationships and to think about that branding strategy, because I think it is quite hard to break in because people want to support Australian businesses, which is great. But also sometimes there's got to be a little bit of internationalization, right?
Right. So when we talk about brand here, it's on two sides. First is the lifestyle, the story that the brand bring.
Yeah.
And secondly is about the awareness of the brand, whether it's international, whether it's the high standard brand, right?
Yeah.
That's the two things.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Okay. So it seems that totally agree with you when you mentioned about the part where it's very easy to get into the conversation, especially with you. That's what I feel from the beginning. But have you ever failed to connect with a person? Can you share with us more of one case about your failures when you try to connect, let's say, business or partnership?
Quite rarely. I feel like it's one of my superpowers is to kind of try to meet and connect with everyone.
Agree. That's yours.
There's naturally moments where you just really don't connect with people. And I think we talk about international business, right? That's one of the hardest parts, right? I think, we mentioned Singapore earlier. lovely people, but I think very different ways of doing business. An example that I can call upon is, so I used to work for a company that they were called Fun Lab. Shout out to Fun Lab, and they basically build entertainment venues around the world. Started in Melbourne, Australia. I helped to scale them to New Zealand and Singapore. Now they're in the US, and I'm talking bougie karaoke, mini golf, bowling, trampoline parks, but at an insane scale. We opened 60 venues in 3 or 4 years, and really amazing growth. Very startup culture, even though it was a physical bricks and mortar venue. When we launched in Singapore, it was so hard because I went in and the whole business went into the idea of we're just doing exactly what we do normally in Australia, and we kept coming up against barriers. Right. And a personal example would be having a meeting with someone where they just walked straight in and were like, here's a 30-page deck we have about a partnership we want to do with you, right? And I'm not used to that in Australia. I'm used to sort of getting to know someone and having a conversation. So I kind of got a little bit standoffish, and then there was no actual relationship being built, and they're just pitching this concept to me, and then they turn around after 20 minutes of talking and just say, what do you think? And I'm like, I kind of like to get to know you first, before I do business with you. And so for me, that was an area where I was like, okay, but that, when you're scaling in international markets, I kind of think you have to be the one that changes a little bit how you act, because that's the local culture, right?
Yeah.
It just took a little bit of time to get used to, and it's not how I like to do business, but that's fine, I think there's a balance to find.
50-page.
Oh, literally, it's look, clicking through the deck, and it was we're sat in we're surrounded by a mini golf, a crazy golf venue, and there's so many fun things happening, and I was like, this doesn't feel. It was 4 p.m. on a Friday, and I was hoping we'd have a couple of beers, and I was like, this is going to be a fun meeting, and then it was just let me pitch to you my 30-page deck. And I'm like, wow, okay, you can, but I won't say who the business was, but it was a partner we wanted to work with as well.
Yeah.
But it was I just kind of want to get to know you first, really. For me, it's I very, very, very rarely do I go into a meeting with an intention and ask. I will literally go in to connect with someone, understand what they're kind of doing, then maybe afterwards I'll think about maybe there's a way we can work together. But it's very much getting to know the person first, beyond just the business. And that's when, the reality is we don't all do the same things for our entire lives, right? So then when you've built that relationship with someone, that carries on beyond the job they're in, or the business they founded, or the country they live in, and that continues forever. Right. That's how I build relationships. And so I can find it really hard when someone just comes at me with the minute you walk in the door, business. So
exactly.
But that different cultures, different ways of working.
Exactly. It's more it's also part of the conversation we had just now with Andy, the CEO. He mentioned about we believe in people.
Yeah.
And we believe that before we talk about technology, it's about people who running the technology, who is the real person behind the technology.
That's it. We're all human beings, right? And so if we can work together as human on a human level first, then I think business is easy to do.
Yes.
And I generally have thus far had that experience in Vietnam. I felt like it's very easy people to work with and very easy conversational tone. So it feels like a similar ways of working to what I enjoy.
So what shaped your business philosophy? Just now we just mentioned about people. Can you share more about your business philosophy?
Yeah. So I have a business coach, and we did a huge deep dive. It's called a mirror immersion session, right? This is the end of last year. I was going in to stand on my own business for the first time. And we sat down for 4 hours and did this crazy biometrics and psychometrics and all these different tests to see kind of what kind of person you are. And the idea was to bring out how to be your best self in business. And my philosophy came back with 2 different keywords: fun and impact.
Okay.
So I think for me, everything I do, I want to enjoy it, because I just don't see what's the point in living life. And I work 70, 80-hour weeks, right? Work never stops. Sometimes I can take a day off whenever I want because I'm my own boss. But I want to wake up every day and feel excited about coming and doing things like this. So the fun element is really important to me. And then the impact piece is, I really believe that we we should be trying to contribute to a better society. I believe strongly in altruism. I don't think that we should be here just trying to make money and be consumptive. And I think I want to leave the people on the planet in a better place than it was. So I think for me, those two elements are really core to my whole business philosophy, and that ties into wanting to build relationships. It ties into kind of what I do now, which is really about trying to connect people across the world and make the world a smaller place almost, and educate people. That's my impact piece. I do a lot of work in supporting migrant entrepreneurs, working with social enterprise and disadvantaged people, help female founders to bridge their funding gap. They're all those pieces of work that I do, and climate space, and that for me is really about that impact piece, right? It's you can help people and have fun, and everyone wins. I think that's the philosophy.
But the more I talk to you, the more I feel like there's a lot of things we can do together.
Oh, definitely, 100%. Love that.
I guess it's small breakfast.
That's it, right? But it's just bringing that positivity to life and everything I do. I think that's what it is, and it's challenging, right? There's days where I wake up and feel like this morning I woke up and I was pretty tired. I feel like as a Australian traveling in Asia, you're never too far away from a day where you just feel knackered from the weather or the different change of activity or food or drink but it's about choosing the right mindset every day, right?
Yeah.
That's what life is for me.
You just brought me back to this moment now, and here we're sitting here with this amazing background, with this amazing set, amazing people who come here and prepare everything, and it's just the right, perfect moment to discuss about this.
Exactly that, right? And it's hopefully someone will be watching this and take inspiration, or it will help them to get through something that's tough, or they'll just think, yeah, I want to do what Dickie does, or I want to feel like that. And that's, if I can do that with any piece of content that I create or community that I build, then
yeah, this is exactly what we're doing. Fun and impact, of course.
Love it.
I may bring back some points about technology. Which domain or industry and which kind of technology that you believe will grow very fast lately and in the near future?
I feel like it's an open goal not to say AI. It feels like every question now that brings me into this, it's about AI. I want to be cautious of what I talk about when it comes to AI because I think it's really important for us to work out how to leverage the best of it and get rid of the worst of it. Right? I feel like right now it's really consumptive in how it works. And if I can't think of the exact stats, but if you do some research on pulling out an AI picture on one of those various websites and how much water that actually consumes to do that, I think it's really damaging. Obviously, this is the start of this technology, and so we're going to find ways to make it more adaptable and actually use it properly. And also, there's so many all the deep fakes and everything that seems like a really dangerous application for that tech. But obviously, it's going to be something that is going to be instrumental in the technology space. I would love to see more investment going into climate solutions. I mean, I think rather than trying to knock up a fancy image of someone on a website, an AI, I'd much rather people trying to put their money into actually helping to solve climate solutions. I know in Australia right now there was some talk recently around the climate funded space being one of the lowest it's been, and a lot of hundreds of startups right now in the climate space are suffering because of lack of investment, which is terrifying, right? Because they are trying to solve the problems that will keep our planet safe and keep us as a human species alive, rather than trying to think about putting money into something that might destroy the human species, right? So, without being too fatalistic. So, I feel for me it's about climate, but it's probably about decentralization when it comes to climate or when it comes to AI or whatever other thing. I think for me the next big theme is decentralization across every industry and every domain, because that's where we're at right now. I think as a society, I think we're on the precipice of social and economic change in terms of how we operate, and so I'm keen to see where that goes.
Can you explain more about the connection between decentralization and climate?
Yeah, I think decentralization for me is about breaking down institutions that are not supportive of where we're going as a society. And I'm not trying to start a riot and change governments and make everyone socialist or whatever. It's more about like understanding that we probably have to change a little bit of how we operate. And I think in the climate space, you know, we're going to have a lot change in how we work as governments across the world, like how we collaborate internationally, how our corporations actually act. So I think there's definitely a piece there in terms of that decentralization.
Actually, the conversation go a lot faster than I think. I thought that it may take more time.
I talk pretty quick.
And some of the things you share is already covers some of the things that I'm about to ask as well. So it's really nice.
I can definitely like riff and take it a different place. Don't worry.
Going back to all the questions that I've shared, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, just maybe we'll talk a little bit about what kind of companies in Australia are excited at the minute, and what kind of I'm sure you've heard of Canva.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was teaching a bunch of so I did I helped at a summer school for children who are disadvantaged, part of the Vietnam Foundation. I did a lecture. I did a talk yesterday on having an innovation mindset, and the students had to do a presentation at the end. We gave them a problem to solve, and they had to do a presentation. And I looked back and like every single student was using Canva to do the presentation, and I felt like quite excited as an Australian because Canva's an Australian business, and I was like, oh, how cool is this? Like a bunch of Vietnamese kids are using like this Australian product, which is, you know, globally now is incredible. In Australia, we quite often get sucked into people just think of Australia and think of two businesses, Canva and Atlassian. They're the two huge unicorns that we have. But I think we're getting to the point now where we're going to have a lot more coming through in the next few years. I'm currently wearing a t-shirt of a company which is really cool that I want to give a shout out to. They're called Val. I'm actually meeting one of the co-founders this afternoon. He lives in Da Nang.
Oh, coincidentally.
I did not know this, right?
Yeah.
So I know the Australian-based co-founder.
Yeah.
And I've been to their office and their factory a couple of times. I told him I was coming to Da Nang, and he was like, oh, my co-founder lives there, I'll connect you. And I was like, what? So I'm keen to understand kind of why and what brought him to Da Nang. But for context, they are like a lab-grown meat company. So they're trying to solve the problem, which is, how do we sustainably as a society keep up with our meat consumption? And most companies who do that, they try to create like a alternative to meat, which is the same as what you already have, right? So like a fake chicken or, a fake pork or whatever. I can't imagine that in my bad meat. And this company, Val, just said, well, no one wants that, right? No one wants to pay more for an inferior product, which is it always is. So they have decided to go down the opposite route, which is creating high-end products using extinct animals. So they literally have, right now in Singapore, you can go to a restaurant and have Japanese quail. And it's like an extinct Japanese quail. And it's currently in Singapore. It's going to launch in Australia next year, in the US in a few months. But they literally could make food out of anything. And it's more interesting, right? Because it's like, wow, you could go and find something you've never eaten and you never thought you would because it's thousands of years ago.
But no one can verify that. No one can verify the taste.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this doesn't taste like Japanese quail. It's true. That is a good part. I never thought about that before.
Yeah,
actually.
let's say you say, okay, today I take you to eat dinosaur meat. So I say, okay, but how can I make sure this is dinosaur meat? I never tasted it before.
They tell you it is, and that's the main thing, right? Isn't like truth in the eye of the beholder. But the original campaign they had when they first launched was around having a woolly mammoth meatball. So you could get a woolly mammoth meatball, like a extinct thousands of year old, dinosaur basically. So I think it's really cool. So right now they're one of the leading food tech companies in the world, and I think that's an amazing, Australian success story, which is also obviously doing some work in Vietnam, which is cool.
Oh, interesting. How important do you think that ESG will impact the decision-making process of Australians?
Quite important, but I wish it was more important. If I've watched a few, my partner actually works in energy, and she works for a company which is basically helping to change their sustainability operations to help them to electrify certain products, so it's more sustainable. And like the things that she talks about, some of the films that I've seen recently, some of the kind of predictions of what society will look like if we don't make a significant change. Like we're already behind. We're already. This sounds really bad to say, but pretty doomed in terms of where we're at with the climate space. Like we're already so far behind that it's going to be so hard to catch up. So I think ESG is the minute it's a priority, but really governments around the world should be making it like the only thing they care about. For us to actually solve, the problems that we have with the climate, we have to stop everything tomorrow and just focus solely on that.
Okay, but what's that like if we don't mention about the government? If it's just us, businessmen, and consumers and business makers, so what's that inside the picture?
Like you're right. I think like it's the same thing, right? It's not just public sector; it's also the private sector. Both have to work hand in hand.
Yes.
I agree. The thing about the reason why I always kind of come to this being a bit of a public sector solution is because, in theory, the money there's meant to be reflective of society, whereas it can be harder sometimes to make a private sector company devolve all their profits, right? Like ultimately, capitalism exists because of their seeking of profit, right? The attempt at making money. So it's kind of hard. Like I think it's hard to expect everyone to turn their businesses into a not-for-profit or a charity or a social enterprise. So that's why I go to the public sector. But it is everyone's responsibility, and we're seeing that now in Australia from the private sector. There is a lot of change happening in ESG policies, but it's not happening quick enough, unfortunately.
But at least doing something is better than doing nothing.
I love the positive spin. You're totally right on that respect.
Yeah. From your perspective, what emerging trends do you believe it will shape the future of market expansion in Australia in specific and APAC region in general?
Yeah, I think Australia is really well positioned to have a really strong ag tech industry, so agriculture. As a country, we are crazy diverse. Like Australia is the size of Europe, right, in terms of the continental landmass.
Yes.
So I think there's plenty of opportunity. We've got desert, we've got jungle, we've got islands, rainforests, green pastures, big cities. I think we are incredibly well placed to lead the ag tech revolution and to really help to bring that to parts of the world where it's not as sophisticated or it's a harder challenge. Great example would be like the Middle East. Like we're finding a lot of success right now in Australia, helping to take the products that we've got in the ag tech space to the Middle East, because they obviously got a much bigger challenge because of the lack of diversity of their landmass, right? So a country like Qatar, for instance, how do they make sure that they've got enough food coming through the supply chain when they've only got desert, right, in the country? So a lot of Australian companies now are helping because we've got the outback, we've got the desert. So we're able to kind of use that like technology and export that to the world. I think that's a huge piece. Again, similar reasons for the climate and sustainability space. I think also, when you're a fairly privileged financially country, you've got more bandwidth to be able to work on sustainability projects than you might have in other countries. I think that's really huge. And I think now in terms of the APAC market, it's a changing landscape, right? Because of political ideologies, I think it's going to change. It's going to change enormously. Like my partner's from India, and I think right now you have to get on board with the fact that India is going to be the global superpower in the next 30, 40 years. And you either get on board with it now or you don't, and you're kind of left behind. Because, that country is just growing at such an incredibly quick rate. That's going to change. And is it BRIC, the alliance between countries like Russia, China, and Brazil, like again, very much changing the landscape of global politics. I think that's going to make a huge impact in terms of collaboration in the APAC space as well. We're seeing, Singapore being quite expensive to do business now. We're seeing like Hong Kong obviously is really challenging in terms of the political climate. So now we're seeing places like Vietnam or Malaysia or Indonesia becoming a lot stronger. And there's also a rising middle class, right? So this is my first time coming back to Vietnam for 12 years. I've been walking into cafes that are like nicer than they are in Australia, and been blown away, and their price is like a third of the price, right?
Yes.
But it's because of this like rising middle class that exists in now, and you see that across the whole of Southeast Asian region. That there's a demand now for that level of quality. That's going to change, because then that means like you've got a young population that wants to work in technology, who are hungry, have a desire to succeed, want to level themselves up. So we're gonna see more and more of this like international, global kind of business being done in Southeast Asia, and I think Australians have to get on board with that as well.
I always get lost in the conversation you share.
Sorry, I know. I feel like I'm just like going to different places and different concepts.
And it means like my mind is completely in the conversation with you, and sometimes I need to come back and say, oh, so what am I about to ask for the next question?
Love it.
So do you think Australia will become the next tech hub globally?
I would like it to. I mean, that's like kind of my job, is to try to make it that way, I think we've got all the ingredients to do that. Look, I know there's things working against us. The location's tough. It's a long flight over from anywhere, basically, which is a bit of a pain. But it's a welcoming country. The infrastructure's amazing. I think we need to maybe work better at actually connecting our different disconnected ecosystems and cities. But I'm doing that work right now, hopefully, so that will help. So I don't see why not. Maybe we make the APAC region the center of the world, rather than like North America or Europe. We focus on APAC, and I'll do the Australia piece. NFQ can help with the Asia piece. Like, perfect collaboration, right?
Yes, I love that idea. Anything else? Anything you think that are the strength of Australian market?
Oh, I think I've talked about a lot of them. Good people, good easygoing people, welcoming people. I think is one of the hugest parts. I know everyone says that, but I genuinely mean that. I think really good infrastructure. We have incredible events. We have incredible like spaces to work in. Really community driven. So I think that's probably the biggest thing about what I see as the potential in Southeast Asia now, is like the demand's there, the opportunity's there, but you've got to build that kind of infrastructure and the ecosystem around it to help support entrepreneurs. I think that's the piece that's maybe not as mature yet as Australia. So in that respect, Australia is amazing.
Yeah.
But that's going to come. I can see it already happening. The more I go, and the longer I spend in Southeast Asia, I'm seeing that. So they're probably the real benefits of Australia.
Having the infrastructure, but still young enough to grow.
Yeah, and I'd say to any Asian company that wants to come to Australia, we've got 25 million people, huge country, speaks English, open to different global cultures.
Yes.
If you want to scale to the US, come to Australia first and test it out. That's what a lot of companies do. Things like it's a colloquial like story, but McDonald's, for instance, like when they first launched their cafe that they launched in Australia because they know they have a smaller market to test it. Then they moved to the rest of the world. And so companies around the world have always done that because it's like a little micro, I guess, American market in a way.
I'm asking this question on behalf of my colleagues who will coming to Australia next month. If there is something that we do that can instantly piss off an Australia and make the guy never want to meet us again, so what could be that thing?
Maybe just don't, make a joke around like kangaroos or all the kind of really Aussie stereotypes. Like maybe come with like a hat with like straw corks on it or all those kind of things, because that's really cliche.
Yeah.
Don't assume that we ride kangaroos to work every day. People sometimes make that joke, which is ridiculous. No, I think it's what I talked about when I talked about the reverse when I went to Singapore, right? Which is like just get to know people, ask them for a coffee. Like generally if you're having a meeting with someone, it's a coffee until 2:00, and if you're meeting someone from 4:00 onwards, it's probably a drink. You don't have to go and get really drunk. Like you don't have to even have a drink. It's just the concept of going for a drink, right? It's not like some cultures where if you're going for a beer, if you leave, it's rude. It's about meeting someone in a casual space, getting to know who they are. I think that's probably the thing. Or if you go to Sydney, go for a walking meeting. Everyone goes for walks down the beach there.
Nice.
Great. So do that. It's just about being polite, being casual, being respectful. You don't have. I think it'd be very hard to annoy someone in Australia in terms of meetings. As long as you're just easygoing.
Koala is also the taboo thing, or just kangaroo.
Koalas are alright. You can say koala. I think kangaroo is like the really cliche thing. I think some people think that we just ride kangaroos around everywhere all day long, like, you know, but we don't.
Yeah, I really love the idea of having a talk when we were walking.
I just lived for 4 months. I'm from Melbourne originally, but I lived 4 months in Bondi Beach in eastern Sydney. And yeah, I was going for like 7 o'clock walking meetings like every day with people. And it was such a casual conversation. And then a couple of times we went for a swim. So I was like in the middle of a meeting just having a swim with someone. And I was like, well, yeah, having a conversation about business. Next thing you know, a wave comes and hits you in the face. And it's like, this is a unique meeting. Yeah, it's fun.
But do you mean that it literally can have business conversation in a swimming pool?
Why not? I always think, right, this is one of my, I guess, like life hacks around relationship building. I always think that the more unique the meeting or experience you have, the more memorable it is with people, right? Like some of my best relationships are like come from like a dance floor. Yeah, someone that I've met when I've been at work. Because so if you go to an Australian event, like there's about 7 or 8 across the country that are about innovation. It's quite casual. Like there's one in a winery in Adelaide. There's one that's like on the beach, and everyone wears shorts and Hawaiian shirts. Like very casual events. A lot of drinking in the evenings. It's optional, right? But like a lot of drinking and dance floor and party sort of things. And some of my best relationships have come from those moments. You know, where I've like had a little dance with someone and kind of like I didn't really know them properly, and then the next day we went for a coffee, and I'm like, and I've kind of bonded over a shared, different, unique experience rather than just sit in a conference hall or, you know, we had a conversation about business straight away. I think like that's something that I've with the swimming thing. Yeah, I'll never forget that meeting that I went swimming and the person because it was so unique.
Okay, so anything, but not a 50-page pitching deck.
Exactly, nailed it.
Anything.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so probably my last question. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs looking to expand their businesses into Australia and other markets you're confident with, and based on your experience?
Yeah, I'd say get to know the local market first. You know, try to build relationships there. I'd say you have to go and do it in person. I don't think you could. It's like imagine buying a house, right? Imagine if you went to try and buy a house in Australia having never been there. Where do you start? You know, like you're gonna make mistakes, like big mistakes. So I think it's the same with trying to scale your business. Go and do a reconnaissance missions first. Go and understand the market, the people. Go and try to build those local relationships with people who can help you. And there's a lot of people there that want to help. Connect with the government in the various states and territories. I think the hard part sometimes in Australia is that they can be very different depending on which part you go to. You know, so try talk to the federal government first and then down to the state government and local governments. But go and visit Melbourne, go visit Sydney and sort of Brisbane and everywhere else and see which place you think is the best fit for your business. And some of those areas are better at one industry, some are better at another. So I'd say that's really important. But just find someone who you can trust who can help make that engagement, right? I think it's like traveling to a country. It's just, you know, trying to meet people, be respectful, try to do your research, and then take it slow. Like, don't expect success overnight.
Exactly.
It will take its time.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Dickie. Thank you for coming to us.
Thanks, Jesse. Had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Yay!